in Birmingham. Let's head down to our feature match area for our first round here of day 2. The format's Legacy, and we're both very excited to see what comes next. Hello and welcome to this round 9 of Grand Prix Birmingham. The format is Legacy, and we're going to get a chance to bring you some of the cooler decks that we saw from day 1. So we're starting with a 6-2 pairing here, and that in part because Sean Fishwick, he's brought kind of a cool list here. In some respects, elements of it are going to be relatively familiar to many of you Legacy players out there. The shell of it is kind of a Nick Fit deck, which is a deck based very heavily around Veteran Explorer. Lots of different basics in the deck, and when Veteran Explorer dies, each player gets to search up a couple of basics and put them into play untapped. There is the Veteran Explorer, very important piece of the puzzle. Already, Marco Bianchi, if he's familiar with Legacy, which I'm sure he is based on his record, he will have a fair idea of what's going on. But when he sees a Gitaxian Probe here, all of a sudden things look a little bit different, because Sean has actually referred to his list as Nyx Fit, as in Journey Into, and you can see there a Starfield of Nyx is one of the cards in his hand. There's an Academy Rector, there's a Phyrexian Tower. You can already see that this is not your classic Nyx Fit deck. Phyrexian Tower sacrificing Veteran Explorer already pretty good, but sacrificing Academy Rector gives a whole toolbox of options that can be very potent indeed.
Yeah, this is quite the impressive hand as well. Garruk Relentless is the Planeswalker you see there. Sean Fishwick was nice enough to put that on top of the double-faced card. And Marco Bianchi looks like he's playing Storm. So at least he has some basics to fetch up himself, because that's really the toughest part of Veteran Explorer, if you don't have 2 basics to search up.
I mean, looking at this hand from Sean, on turn 2 he can play Phyrexian Tower, sacrifice his Veteran Explorer for black, fetch up 2 basics. Suddenly he's got access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana. He can cast that Academy Rector if he wants to. He could even cast the Starfield of Nyx if he really wanted to. And he's got access to everything he's got going, and when you start sacrificing Academy Rector, there has never been a point in the history of Magic where you have not done something foolish.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that tutor effects are very powerful, but when you get also the mana discount, when you don't have to pay to get the permanent onto the battlefield, the sky is the limit. You can get 8, 9, 10 mana enchantments, whatever you want. In fact, Academy Rector helped me win my very first PTQ, so I have fond memories of Phyrexian Tower and Academy Rector myself.
Yeah, there were periods in time where doing things with, I don't know, for example, Yawgmoth's Bargain was kind of the attractive thing to do with Academy Rector. That's not something that you'll see in Legacy anymore. But when you have a format with almost all of the cards ever printed in Magic available to you, suffice to say there are some pretty potent enchantments to be searched out. So far from Marco, we've just seen this Gitaxian Probe. I'm certain that we're going to see a little bit more from him soon enough. And if he is a Stormless, then potentially he could get a whole lot going on this first turn. Elects to just play an Underground Sea and pass. In some respects here, he's masking a little bit about what his deck has going on. Might as well get in a cheeky hit here.
And I'm sure he would love to get some basics. I mean, if you give mana acceleration to a Storm deck, to Ad Nauseam Tendrils, then maybe we can look at a turn to Storm combo kill as well.
Now, there are plenty of decks in this Legacy format that when you sacrifice your Veteran Explorer, you get 2 basic lands in play, untapped mind, and your opponent gets exactly 0. There are a lot of decks that will be true of. Right here, Sean Fishwick finds himself up against an opponent who does have basic lands to fetch, and that is a kind of a tricky element to matchups that will just happen to him from time to time here. The fact that he's able to have a pretty solid follow-up here in terms of the creature that he plays means that he may be able to get away with this if he can correctly identify that Storm is what's being played on the other side of things. If he sacrifices Academy Rector to get something that was good against a different deck in the format, he may find himself in a spot of bother here.
Yeah, and he will actually have to find something quick. He knows that he doesn't have much time if he realizes that he's actually playing against Ant here.
I mean, at the moment, it's kind of just the greatest hits of blue Legacy decks for Marco Bianchi here. Getting to cast Brainstorm at the end of turn. No shuffle effect at present, but it would not surprise me at all if between the raft of cards in his hand right now, he's able to find one just to mean that those 2 cards that are put back, he's only going to have to draw one of them on his draw step and then shuffle away potentially the worst of them.
Bianchi could have responded to the Veteran Explorer trigger. That would have been a nice way to get a shuffle effect for Brainstorm.
But there is the Polluted Delta.
Even for Legacy, that's a pretty unusual turn 2, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the Storm deck, with a fair wind and not very much disruption, can be thinking about going off on turn 2 without any help. And here, Sean Fishwick has given 2 additional copies of Basic Island to the Storm deck to be able to get something going. With so many cards in hand, so much mana available, Marco might be able to close this game out before he has to worry about whatever that Academy Rector has going for it.
And you have to assume that if that Academy Rector gets sacrificed, that there will be some one-off in Fishwick's deck to help against these kind of combo matchups, because he's kind of soft to them. So you would want at least a Dovescape, but probably something even better to make sure that you're not dying on the next turn.
All right, so we're starting things off with a Preordain. Storm count 1. And at the moment, Marco still able to some extent, disguise what his deck is really trying to do. Yes, it was a little unusual fetching 2 islands if it works out that he is a bug list, for example. And even having 2 islands would be a little over the top there.
Yeah, I think Sean has a pretty good idea what he's facing at this time. That many basics, no third color. There are a lot of things that Sean can base this on.
For now, though, it's just dig, dig, dig for Marco Bianchi. Storm one of comparatively small number of decks in Legacy that really can make the most of Dark Ritual. It's a very, very powerful card, but it's one that somehow or other is not played especially widely in Legacy these days. Marco Bianchi just figuring out the details of what he wants to do with his scry here. The interesting thing to me about the Storm decks is that, yes, they can have individual turns that take a long time, but because they're planning on playing a game that really doesn't last very many turns, it's not as if spending that time ends up creating big, long matches that never finish. All right, here's our Dark Ritual. We're off to the races.
3 black mana and a storm count of 3.
And as soon as you start noting down your storm count and making a little column of mana, column of storm count, it becomes very clear what's going on. And our spotters here, just so that you guys on camera can clearly figure out what's going on, they're keeping track of, that's the black mana available to Marco Bianchi, just with that swamp and die on the battlefield there. Lotus Petal, storm count 4. Being able to run the full 4 copies of Lotus Petal in Legacy, a big boon to these decks. And it looks like Marco happy to just stick with black mana. He's got Ad Nauseam here. On 16 life, this will draw him an awful lot of cards. Not like the modern deck, so this is not the unfair kind of Ad Nauseam where you can draw your entire deck. He will be taking damage for each converted mana cost in the cards that are revealed, but the overall mana costs in this Storm deck low enough that Ad Nauseam represents a gigantic card drawing spell.
And finding a Lotus Petal here is huge, because he was currently looking at a hand that couldn't generate any extra mana itself. So Lotus Petal would be the first step towards getting up to 4 black mana or 6 black mana to go for the win.
Yeah, I mean, basically a Dark Ritual here, and he's incredibly close. At the moment, he has a Cabal Ritual, but that does cost 2 mana and won't let him accelerate just yet. More copies of Cabal Ritual, so he's dipping a touch low here. There's the Dark Ritual, though. He should not need to go much further at all here.
Well, the thing is, he needs a way to empty his hand. The Infernal Tutor doesn't really get him his win condition if he's still holding all these lands, for example. So it kind of depends if he's holding something else, or if he has to continue going, maybe. Of course, now at 4, he has the danger of just dying. We will see, depending on his hand. And only black mana available, of course. So Lotus Petal as a black, Dark Ritual 3 black, then 2 Cabal Rituals. So that's a lot of black mana, and you have the Infernal Tutor. So maybe you can do something with that.
It looks like Marco satisfied that is good enough. Getting the storm count high enough, not typically too much of a problem for this deck. Choking on cards and mana, a little bit trickier sometimes.
He was even holding an additional Lotus Petal, so his chances of going off successfully were quite high as long as he finds a Lotus Petal or a Dark Ritual.
Gataxian Probe here. He already knew about most of those cards, just happened to see an extra copy of Academy Rector here. But crucially, it's another way of drawing a card. Life would be much easier here with a Lion's Eye Diamond.
Yeah, that's what he was looking for. And if he doesn't have a guaranteed kill in hand, I think he should have continued, or he would have continued using Ad Nauseam here.
So he starts off with making a blue mana here. Thanks to having 2 copies of Lotus Petal, he's able to use one of them for blue mana, the other one for black, then Dark Rituals ad infinitum, more or less. But the blue mana will mean that he can potentially be casting another card drawing spell here.
Yeah, what he might be thinking about is even using one of his Infernal Tutors to thin his deck or to shuffle his deck, maybe get an additional Brainstorm or something out of it. But he has to do the math especially about the amount of black mana he has. To simplify things, I think it's clear that you have to win this turn anyway. So if you wanted to simplify your calculations, you could actually just cast all your rituals now and then see what happens, unless you're planning to copy a ritual with your Infernal Tutor.
Yeah, Infernal Tutor for another Dark Ritual. Occasionally helpful. In this case, I think that there's going to have to be an optimistic Brainstorm at some point in this sequence if he's going to find the win here. Easily has Threshold here, meaning +3 black mana off this Cabal Ritual. And in some respects, keeping track of storm count beyond here is kind of irrelevant.
Yes, and Sean is doing the nice thing of helping Marco keep track of everything, the game state, especially floating mana and storm count. If you're figuring out these lines and you have to fiddle with all these dice, it's not always the most convenient.
I mean, I would suggest that for a player in Sean's seat in this sequence, it makes sense to do this not just to be a nice guy, but also because it means that you can double check that your opponent is calculating everything correctly. If they happen to miscount and it means that they end up with one more mana or one more storm than perhaps they should, that could lose you the game. So staying engaged in these turns where your opponent is doing an awful lot of things and you're just kind of sat there with your Academy Rector in play is pretty important.
Yeah, and I believe that Marco has now found what he was looking for.
A Dark Petition,
I think I saw a Dark Petition, yes, and that should be lethal.
A Dark Petition with 9 mana. It, of course, generates 2 mana itself, so essentially costing 2 black mana, leaving 7 in pool. Storm count is 12. Tendrils of Agony with a storm count of 12 will be, or 13 at this point, will be plenty to close out this game. And there it is, finishing things off with Tendrils of Agony, the classic Storm finisher. And that enough to take game 1 for Marco Bianchi. Good work from him. And Sean Fishwick will be going to his sideboard. This has to be the kind of matchup that he knew was going to be a little bit tricky. He's not got access to Force of Will or similar to be able to counter key spells from the Storm deck, so instead I would anticipate seeing a few key sideboard cards, enchantments specifically, I would imagine, that are able to make this matchup a little better.
Yeah, it is a really tough matchup for him. I agree with that. Also, and we didn't really see that in game one, he has so many dead cards that just don't do anything against hand. But after sideboarding, I expect Sean to just bring in for Leyline of the Void, Leyline of Sanctity, a Gadok Teak, just basically anything in his sideboard that has even a small chance of doing anything. I mean,
Phyrexian Revoker naming Lotus Petal is actually a pretty big deal. Likewise, naming Lion's Eye Diamond, because Phyrexian Revoker can shut off the mana abilities of artifacts and so on and so forth.
Exactly. So Sean will easily be able to cut some of these cards here. I'm looking at Swords to Plowshares, Abrupt Decays, Lingering Souls that he doesn't really need, and also looking at his list, he has a few more spicy cards in there.
I mean, when you've got Academy Rector to be able to search things up, of course you're going to have a few nice ones to pick up over there. We won't do too many spoilers just yet, but rest assured that this list will be available on the text coverage side of things. It's kind of a cool one. We want to make sure that you guys have the opportunity to play, but equally, it'd be a shame for Sean to not even show off these cards in the feature match area and yet still lose to people in the room suddenly knowing more about his list than maybe is entirely fair. These players shuffling up relatively quickly here. It's obvious that Sean, at least, is very keen to try and win all of his money back in Game 2 after Marco Bianchi able to make the most of the additional lands provided by Veteran Explorer, get in that extra damage here. Leyline of Sanctity, a big one there that obviously can come into play on the very first turn. Even Leyline of the Void, it makes the likes of your Cabal Rituals that much worse. It's not necessarily quite the powerhouse that it would be in some matchups, but it certainly does do work, and when you know that you've got cards to cut, it's a relatively easy one to add in there. 4 copies of Cabal Therapy, which work very nicely. A Veteran Explorer could also prove to be relatively handy against this Storm list.
Absolutely, yeah. That's what he would like to see in the opening hand. He actually would have liked to see it in game 1, because of course he is playing Cabal Therapy, 4 of them in the main deck. It's kind of the perfect card for Veteran Explorer and Academy Rector.
Yeah, definitely the tools to fight back here. This is not over. We will be bringing you more Magic after this match. We've got one of our 8-0 matches. Suffice to say that while many people brought along decks that are relatively big players in the Legacy metagame, that does not necessarily describe all of the players that are doing well. We're going to get a chance to see Johan de Gruyter with an interesting 8-0 list that I'm kind of excited to see how it actually plays out on camera soon enough. But we're going to be sticking with Nyx Fit versus Storm while these guys are finishing out their first match. And of course, we will have Legacy all day today. There is a standard Grand Prix going on here in Birmingham at the same time. Because of the logistics of trying to jump between 2 GPs, we're not going to be bringing you standard today, but there will be a lot of standard action available for you tomorrow. I spoke to Jerry Thompson last night, who's travelled across from the United States specifically to play in the standard, looking to get in a little bit of testing before the Pro Tour. And he's pretty excited about this standard format. There's a lot of new options afforded to the Wily deck builder with Dominaria, and well, he had a spicy brew that he was testing out yesterday in some side events. Whether or not that's what he's ultimately chosen to go with today and hopefully tomorrow, we'll find out later on in our weekend.
It's an interesting situation with the Pro Tour being so late after the release. Do you hide your tech for a full month, or do you go to these events and really try out what's working, what's not? I'm definitely looking forward to Sunday. And of course, we have to hope that Jerry makes day 2. Otherwise, we are not able to cover him on video.
And I was actually talking to Andrea Mengucci as well. Mengucci did play Legacy yesterday, is playing Legacy the start of this morning. But with a couple of buys sat in his back pocket, he really likes his standard deck. And he said if he starts off on a poor start today, he might jump across to standard because, number one, he really likes what he's got going on in standard. Number two, he said, this is one of the toughest day 1 GPs I've played in a long time because every single player that's here has been playing their Legacy deck for so long and knows their deck so well that there are no easy matchups anymore. He said that in his first round of the tournament, he played against a player playing Ad Nauseam. It was their very first GP, and they played Ad Nauseam perfectly and were just doing everything correctly. And that's something that all of those reps, playing it in your local shop, playing with your friends over weeks and months and years, mean that these Legacy players, they got some moves.
Yeah, Legacy is not easy, and especially if you are, let's say, a Pro Tour pro, then Legacy is the format you might feel the most disadvantaged when it comes to preparation, because you are focusing on standard, limited, modern to an extent, and there are players who play Legacy basically every week.
Absolutely. Mengucci, I would say, of the players on the regular on the Pro Tour, is probably one of the players that plays Legacy more than most. But that said, he is not a Legacy aficionado in the same way that many of the players in this room are. All right, kicking things off for our game 2 here. A little nod of the head as the players draw their opening hands. Starting 7's pretty important, but we may see Sean Fishwick elect to judiciously mulligan to find ley lines in particular, because they are obviously so powerful in the opening hand. We see a Curse of Death's Hold in hand for him. That potentially pretty decent against an Empty the Warrens plan, but also if he was planning on doing something with Dovescape, it lets him get the full lock there. Phyrexian Revoker, he's got Veteran Explorer, he's got the lands to cast each.
This hand looks fine, right? You have a lot of things going on. I mean, you have a Black Leyline, you have a Veteran Explorer, you have a Phyrexian Revoker, and the mana to cast all of them. I don't think you can expect much more.
Sean just stepping away from the table here, potentially double-checking something with a judge, just making sure that he understands a key interaction before he kicks the game off. Marco Bianchi, disciplined. I don't believe he's even looked at his opening 7 yet.
That's old school.
I mean, the reasoning behind that is that you want to wait and see your opponent's reaction to their hand, whether or not they mulligan, before you start making rash decisions about your own. Slows things down a tiny bit, but whether or not a hand is a keeper does, in some regards, depend on whether or not your opponent is on a mulligan or not.
In the past, you knew even if they were going down to 5.
Yes.
So because the mulligan order was different.
Looks like we do have a keep from Sean. And it's a keep from Marco and an immediate leyline of the Void coming from Sean Fishwick. So in terms of Marco Bianchi's graveyard, for now, not a thing, not worth worrying about. And Windswept Heath, little shortcut there just to keep things moving into Veteran Explorer. Uses a Bayou there so that there will be access to black mana in addition to green on subsequent turns.
Yeah, and now Marco Bianchi, whenever a card would be put into his graveyard, it's instead removed from the game. That's not hugely relevant for his game plan, but it does make sure that he'll never reach threshold for Cabal Ritual, and also plans surrounding Past in Flames are turned off. So even though it doesn't shut off the whole deck, it does shut off some key interactions.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key things that this deck is looking to do is use rituals to go from 1 or 2 mana up to 5, 6, 7 mana. And Cabal Ritual, while it is still a net gain in mana when you cast it without Threshold, it becomes a bit of a slog to get up to the 4, 5, 6 mana with rituals. And Past in Flames, giving all the cards in your graveyard flashback, really doesn't do a whole lot when you don't have a graveyard.
No, that card is basically dead now.
Past in Flames, familiar to players of Storm in Modern. Interesting that modern versions of Storm tend to be red-blue, where in Legacy it's largely black-blue, and that really down to where the rituals fall. You have access to both Dark Ritual and Cabal Ritual in Legacy, along with the, I would say, strictly superior win condition of being able to cast Tendrils of Agony to finish things off.
And if you made Dark Ritual Modern legal, I think we would also see some more Black Storm decks in Modern.
So initially just fetching up an Underground Sea here. And Marco Bianchi, it's not as if based on what he's seen thus far, he needs to be going to the races too terribly fast here. One of the talents of playing a combo deck like Storm is figuring out the right time to try and go off.
Yeah, and it is kind of tricky because you are playing against a deck that can also get an explosive mana advantage, that can rip your hand apart with Cabal Therapy, and you still have to respect those Academy Rectors.
So duress coming from Bianchi here. He's going to get to strip something out of the opposing hand. It can only be a spell, so Curse of Death's Hold and what's the other one?
And Cruel Reality. 7 mana Curse.
It's sort of the Abyss. You have to sacrifice your opponent, the person that has been cursed, has to sacrifice a creature each turn or lose 5 life. So it's an interesting one because against decks that have lots of creatures, it helps them keep down the number of creatures they have in play. Against the decks that don't have lots of creatures, for example Storm, it's 5 damage a turn and that'll add up pretty quickly.
Yeah, but of course it's also not as powerful in Tron's hand as it would be in Tron's library, because then now he cannot find it with Academy Rector. I'm actually a bit surprised about this choice. Why would you take the 7 mana card when you can take a 5 mana card instead? Yeah, apparently he's more concerned about the effect of Cruel Reality.
So it looks like Marco just double-checking a little something. He is allowed to take note of what's in his opponent's hand here. Maybe just double-checking how Phyrexian Revoker might function against what he's got going on. Now, if you're casting Phyrexian Revoker next turn as Sean Fishwick, which card do you name?
There are 2 options, right? It's either Lotus Petal or Lionside Diamond.
Mm-hmm.
I think Lionside Diamond is the more powerful card of the 2, but Lotus Petal is particular in the sense that it allows you to go off with Ad Nauseam without really needing to rely on Lionside Diamond. I think I still call Lionside Diamond because I think it's overall the more powerful card.
It's kind of one of the interesting wrinkles in Legacy when you compare it to Vintage, that in Vintage there are various cards that are restricted, and actually a lot of them are the cards that are being played in Storm. And in the Legacy version of Storm, you get to play 4 copies of Lion's Eye Diamond, 4 copies of Lotus Petal, where if you were playing a Vintage Storm deck, you would only have 1 of each. And it means that sort of there are moments where you can be playing Storm in Legacy where it can just feel crazy powerful.
Yeah, sometimes even more powerful than in Vintage, yeah.
So it is Lion's Eye Diamond that gets named by Sean with that Phyrexian Revoker. Veteran Explorer, just chuck it into the red zone for now. No sacrifices just yet from Sean. And it may be that actually he's pretty hesitant to sacrifice that Veteran Explorer for anything less than maybe a flashback Cabal Therapy to really finish off Marco Bianchi's hand.
I think Sean needs to find a turn where he can actually do something relevant with the mana of Veteran Explorer. Last game he played an Academy Rector and then lost the game the turn after. That's not what he wants to happen. By the way, Sean is holding Evolutionary Leap. He just drew it for the turn. That's a card that is potentially scary for Bianchi because it allows Sean to basically activate his toolbox.
So as things stand, early turns, we're going to have Marco just sculpting a better hand. That Evolutionary Leap you see on the side there, green, sacrifice a creature to reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card, put that in your hand. So Veteran Explorer chained into either more Veteran Explorers or Veteran Explorer chained into Academy Rector, which can then be sacrificed to get more enchantments. A very powerful addition to this deck, and actually of the enchantments in his deck, it's one of the few of which he has multiples.
Yeah, this is not one to fetch with Academy Rector. It's one to draw naturally and to activate.
Another ley line picked up there by Sean Fishwick.
Yep, that was a very dead draw. A green source would have allowed him to sacrifice Veteran Explorer if he wanted to.
And I guess that now, after sideboarding, he can also potentially end up finding Gadok Teague or more copies. I think he only has the 1 Phyrexian Revoker, so that might be the last of them that he could happen to turn up with Evolutionary Leap.
Correct.
In some respects, he may just want to be drawing lots of Veteran Explorers because that lets him initially widen the board quite a bit. And I can't imagine that, even though we have seen that Marco Bianchi has at least 2 islands, that he has a crazy amount of basics in his list.
He has 3 basics, 2 islands and a swamp. 1 island already in play, so he will only get 2 more basics at maximum.
Chain of Vapor there on the Phyrexian Revoker. Chain of Vapor, a pretty common sideboarded in card for Storm, as it lets you deal with just about any permanent on the battlefield. In principle here, Sean Fishwick can sacrifice a land in order to bounce something else. I can't imagine that that's something that he's going to be keen to do.
No, and this spells trouble for Sean, because Marco is investing a lot of resources here to get the Phyrexian Revoker off the table for just 1 turn. So we might even see him go off here.
Yeah, Chain of Vapor, not normally a card that you see deployed until the point that you need that empty board to be able to get things going.
No, and especially because he sacrificed a Lotus Petal for it. So he could have just untapped and done the same thing. We will see if it works out for him.
I mean, if nothing else, that way round would have granted him an additional Storm.
Yep. I don't know if Sean played the Evolutionary Leap before combat, so maybe Marco saved 2 life by doing it that way. That would be the only argument for that kind of order. But as you can tell, Marco is really already counting up his cards here. So for those that don't know, what you want to be doing with Lion's Eye Diamond is you want to have some kind of effect on the stack that allows you to draw cards or to search your library for a card with Infernal Tutor. And then with that effect on the stack, you sacrifice all your Lion's Eye Diamonds and effectively turn them into Black Lotus. Okay, you lose your hand, but you're getting a mana boost unlike no other.
And of course, the Lion's Eye Diamond itself, just when you cast it, represents an additional Storm count. Many good things happen with Lion's Eye Diamond. A card that, when it first came out, looked like one of the worst cards in Mirage, the quote-unquote fixed Black Lotus. As it turns out, still a pretty decent Black Lotus. So here we see even a lower-powered Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, still relatively powerful, up to 4 black mana now. And the last card in hand, that's an Infernal Tutor. In response, sacrifice Lion's Eye Diamond. Storm count 6 already.
Storm count 6, he has 5 black, 6 if he uses Lotus Petal. So he doesn't have lethal with Tendrils, even if he gets another Infernal Tutor. 6, 7, 8. He's very close to lethal, but not quite there.
So it looks like he's going to be going for an Ad Nauseam here.
Which makes sense, given that the Tendrils kill is not sufficient. And he's on 15 life with not a mana floating, but a Lotus Petal in play.
So 1 Lotus Petal in play, one Lotus Petal and 1 Lion's Eye Diamond currently used. And he has not played a land yet this turn. Odds seem pretty good for Marco Bianchi here.
I would say that this is not a guaranteed kill, but it's very, very likely to succeed. He doesn't need that much, and even finding Tendrils and the mana to cast it is going to be sufficient, because he only needs 4 more spells. Oh, actually 3 more after Ad Nauseam.
All right. Ad Nauseam, always kind of a fun spell to watch get resolved in this specific deck, because there is the potential for things to go wildly wrong. Seems unlikely to be the case in this instance.
Oh,
that's a big miss. 4 more damage. Lion's Eye Diamond, plus an Infernal Tutor.
Yeah, so Dark Ritual would be super helpful here. Lands are good as well. Let's not forget the land drop.
Duressing Ataxin Probe. The Ataxin Probe does represent a point of damage because its converted mana cost is still 1. Another Infernal Tutor. This is getting a little close now.
Not a lot of fast mana in this stack. Now Marcus, once again, he has to check if he has if he might have lethal already here. But I think he's lacking mana.
And
Even with the Lion's Eye Diamond, it's kind of difficult to get going.
Has to go a little deeper. Ponder. Now, if he stops right now, he can at least Gitaxian Probe to get one more card. Wow, Cabal Ritual drops him to 1, but I think that Ritual might be the extra point of mana that just gets him there. This is going to be very close.
I think it's exactly enough. You have a land drop, you have a Ritual, and you have a Lion's Eye Diamond, which is 6 mana, and then Infernal Tutor Tendrils is exactly 20. Or maybe 22.
So there's the Cabal Ritual. Up to 3 mana.
Mm-hmm.
Spends 2 of it. There's Infernal Tutor. In response, activate the Lion's Eye Diamond, discard the hand, and that's enough for the handshake. Sean Fishwick knows what's coming from here. And Marco Bianchi, he made it exciting in both games there.
It doesn't get closer than that. Like 1 life and the exact mana to do it. Otherwise, Marco could have lost here.
Great stuff. We didn't get a chance to see everything that the Nyx Fit deck can do, but as mentioned previously, we will get a chance to get that list to you thanks to our hard-working writers on the text coverage team. I know that they were up late into the night last night typing up deck lists, and I believe that there's going to be quite a bit more deck list typing going on because we know that you guys love this Legacy format. We know that there are a few cool decks that you don't get to see quite so often. We want to make sure we bring them all to you. We will have more Magic from this round 9 here soon enough. Do not go anywhere. We will have a Time Walk match for you from our ATO players right after these messages. Hello and welcome back to coverage of Grand Prix Birmingham. It's day 2 of our Legacy Grand Prix here. Yes, technically we've got a standard GP going on, but for now at least we're bringing you a whole bunch of Legacy for the rest of today. And we're going to get a chance to jump back into our feature match area for a little bit more of round 9 and see some more magic here from Johan de Gruyter and Gregor Kowalski, both of these players on 8-0. And de Gruyter here, the list that he's on, is described as Steel Stompy. Take us through what that is, Simon, because it's a little bit different.
Yes, this is a deck that plays a lot of lock pieces and then combines them with cards like Steel Overseer and Arcbound Ravager, so that's where the name comes from. The key to this deck is that it's almost colorless and you're playing the unfair lands, the City of Traders and the Ancient Tombs of the format. Throne of Amethyst on the battlefield now, one of the ways to lock a lot of decks out of the game.
And that's enough to prompt a daze from Gregor Kowalski, who does manage to transform his Delver of Secrets into Insectile Aberration on his second turn without any extra help. He just sees a Lightning Bolt on top. That's enough for a 3-2 attacking in. And a 3-2 attacking in plus the damage from that Ancient Tomb that Johan de Gruyter has in play could mean that this is a relatively quick game.
Yeah, very good start for Kowalski here. For those that play Modern, the Steel Stompy deck plays a little bit like Eldrazi Tron, just with very different cards, but the general concept is the same. And for those that play Vintage, the Steel Stompy decks is kind of emulating a shop stack in the sense that you're trying to get at least one lock piece out and then big threats to close out the game while the opponent is hopefully not doing too much.
Wow. If that daze hadn't stopped the first Thorn of Amethyst, then this could have been very difficult for Grixis Delver here. The second Thorn of Amethyst might stick, but as things stand, Johan de Gruyter already on 13 life. He's activated that Ancient Tomb twice, and this is the second hit that he's taken from Insectile Aberration. Half his life total already gone, and I guess this is the dark side of Ancient Tomb, that occasionally you'll find yourself on the wrong side of a whole lot of damage. And Gregor Kowalski able to play a creature that turn in Young Pyromancer, so not taxed by the Thorn of Amethyst.
Yeah, but that's what you sign up for when you come to a tournament with 4 Ancient Tombs. You are ready to use it. You're not gonna not use it because you would rather have the life totals. That's, you live by the tomb, you die by the tomb.
And then once you've died by the tomb, you get to live in the tomb.
Or not live.
Sure. Habitate. So here we see Gregor Kowalski, pretty much business as usual. Is a steel champion in play that an etched champion in play that means that Young Pyromancer are not too keen on attacking. Meanwhile, the Insectile Aberration quite happy to get stuck into the red zone on each and every occasion. Johan de Gruyter on just 5 life now, and True Name Nemesis naming Johan de Gruyter is likely going to be enough to close this one out, I would imagine.
I mean, this is just brutal. Kowalski with the perfect start and the perfect answers, not even hindered by Throne of Amethyst, and Johan's cards look a lot weaker than what Gregor is doing here.
Worth noting, both these players are 8-0. There's definitely some potency in this Steel Stompy list. Dealing with that first copy of Thorn of Amethyst, kind of a big deal for Gregor, though worth noting that almost all of the cards he's cast are creatures, so even in that instance, not doing too much. And Johan just has to scoop things up, and by the magic of Time Walk, we get to go all the way to the point where Kowalski finishes resolving his mulligan, and we see an early start from Johan here of Lotus Petal into Mox Opal. 2-mana Mishra's Factory. There's still Overseer.
Not the strongest of starts. No lock piece, no unfair mana, and not even an active Mox Opal. So I think Gregor once again can be quite happy how things are going. Of course, in game 1 was also absolutely crucial that he was on the play, allowing him to Delver and daze the first lock piece.
Yeah, as with a Vintage Workshops deck, when you're on the play with the ability to throw down a piece of disruption before your opponent's done anything, that is an enviable position to be in.
Yeah, that's always tricky, playing these decks that are so play draw dependent. Not something I like to do, but Johan clearly doing well here at 8-0. Or he won a lot of die rolls, we will never know.
A little from column A, a little from column B, I would imagine. No additional land here from Johan de Gruyter. This could be a quick 2-0 for Gregor Kowalski, which I'm sure that he will not mind at all.
I have to say I didn't like this keep. Looking at the hand and that you absolutely need to draw an artifact or land to do anything on your turn 2, I think that was too optimistic.
So as things stand, Deathrite Shaman certainly not as powerful at closing out games quickly in the same way as Delver of Secrets is, but thus far what Kowalski has going on working out kind of nicely for him. Wasteland here can deal with that Mishra's Factory if Kowalski so chooses, but it may be that he wants to wait on more potent threats to come along later. Lightning Bolt, there is the Wasteland. Johan, very little to work with here. And is that an Ancient Grudge in Gregor Kowalski's hand?
It is.
Oh, this could be very painful indeed for de Gruyter.
And Kowalski doesn't even have to Ancient Grudge at this point.
Brainstorm just further improving the quality of what's going on in Kowalski's hand. We can see that there's a Delver of Secrets sat in there, the checklist card that he's carefully blanked out everything but Delver of Secrets to make it super clear to him exactly what it represents in hand.
And now when you're casting Brainstorm and you're going to follow it up with a fetch land, he can even use Deathrite Shaman to cast Delver of Secrets. That way keep the top of his library intact for his upkeep Delver to flip.
And there it is. Meanwhile, Johan here draws and just has to pass the turn. A very lonely looking Mox Opal, the only permanent that he has in play. Insectile Aberration, the transform there, and that means that big attacks here from Gregor Kowalski, who has pretty much the earth and everything on it in terms of what he is achieving in this game too. Already a game up, and at 8-0, looking likely to advance to 9-0 here, Simon.
Yeah, heavy favorite, of course, in this game. If you couldn't tell by the fact that Johan has only a Mox Opal in play.
I mean, in abstract, Mox Opal a very powerful card, but this is a format full of very powerful cards, and one Mox Opal certainly does not a game make.
Yeah, all 5 permanents on the battlefield, I would say, among the most powerful cards ever printed.
So Gitaxian Probe here draws a card for Kowalski, lets him know exactly what's going on, what he might expect to see from de Gruyter if he's able to somehow draw his way out of this.
Yeah, it's basically cards you know from your Modern Affinity. I believe 2 Arcborn Ravagers, a Steel Overseer, a Spell's Guide, and a Vault Scourge. Johan needs to top deck a Darksteel Citadel if he wants to get back into this game.
Darksteel Citadel because it's the safest land to actually keep around that also is an artifact for Mox Opal?
Exactly. So it at least gives him a chance at reaching Metalcraft for that Mox Opal.
Now, Gurmag Angler, the pickup for Kowalski here. If you're looking at ways of speeding up the clock a little bit, that certainly qualifies.
I have to say, personally, I prefer the check pile decks, Deathrite decks, to the Delver decks, but what Kowalski is doing here with his Delver does look very impressive.
One way or another, Delver of Secrets has proven to be a potent card in Legacy. A 3/2 flyer for 1 in a color that gets to play the control role, as it turns out, very powerful.
No, and you want to be playing blue anyway.
Lightning Bolt the pickup along with another Delver of Secrets there. Drawing Delver of Secrets off a Brainstorm, a really nice feeling because it's very easy indeed to make sure that it does transform into Insectile Aberration.
Which I believe Kowalski is doing here exactly that. He has a Ancient Grudge, Dismember, and Gurmag Angler in hand, all of which don't do much now, but he wouldn't mind flipping a Delver.
Even gets to leave up Deathrite Shaman to do all sorts of naughtiness later. Ensnaring Bridge the pickup, and that's enough for Johan de Gruyter to just say no. All over there. Kowalski advancing to 9-0. Congratulations to him. Obviously, quite a few more rounds to go before we go to our top 8, but He literally could not have had a better start into this tournament.
You know, you're 8-0, you go to bed at night, you think, oh, that's going to be a tough day tomorrow, and then you're kind of lucky to get this kind of pairing, these kind of draws, where you're suddenly 9-0 and your chances of top 8ing have just increased significantly.
Yeah, go and get yourself a nice breakfast for the rest of the round, because even though we are getting towards the end of our round, that of course was a time walk match that got recorded at the very start, so I would imagine that Greg Kowalski will have been sitting around having a lovely time for a little while now. But we've got even more magic for you given how quick that matchup was. We're going to get a chance to see Andres Kedrovic against John McNulty, and still more Gitaxian probes going on here. This time we see Smuggler's Copter and 3 copies of Master of the Pearl Trident alongside a Mutavault and an island. We've got some merfolk on the battlefield. Well, in hand.
Not the fastest start, but it does pose a serious clock if you just run out Merfolk Lord after Merfolk Lord.
Yeah, I mean, granting Island Walk to all of your merfolk, pretty decent in Legacy. There are a lot of islands knocking about. 2 copies of Gitaxian Pro here being played by Andres Kedrovic before anything else goes on, and we see a City of Traitors the pick up there. So this could be a pretty explosive start from him. Has an Ancient Tomb.
Yeah, and this is kind of the problem. John is playing against Sneak and Show or Omni Show. I believe there are 4 Omniscients in the deck, and John's hand didn't really offer any disruption. So even though he top decked a Curse Catcher, now he's really even though he's playing blue, not looking at a single Force of Will to interact with what the combo deck of Andre might be doing.
So City of Traitors and Ancient Tomb, between them, that's 4 mana off those 2 lands. Yes, when Kedrovic has to play another land, City of Traitors will go away, but essentially treating it as a ritual that you might get to cast twice that costs you a land drop. Perfectly fine a lot of the time in Modern. Curse Catcher comes along, jumps in a Smuggler's Copter. This allows John McNulty to improve the quality of his hand just a shade here.
And John knows that he needs certain answers to interact with what Andre is up to. He needs counter magic. That would be the most important part.
And because he had a Mutavault as the 3rd land there, it meant that he wasn't able to cast his Master of the Pearl Trident following up from Curse Catcher there. Decided Curse Catcher just a more important creature.
Andre's hand is a disaster. He has Ancient Tomb and 2 City of Traitors, but no blue source. So he's looking at all these Omnisciences and Emrakul's and doesn't even have blue mana to cast anything. Well,
John McNulty, he needs to make hay while the sun shines here, try and get as much damage through as he can before Kedrovic able to draw out of things. And the fact that it was just a discard there on that last turn has to signal to him that there's blood in the water.
Yeah, maybe he could have even known that Andre was not holding a blue land because of this City of Traitors. Why would you play City of Traitors as your 2nd land when you have an island available as well?
Ether Vial coming down here from John McNulty.
You can see that John is not going for maximum damage. He is not attacking with Mutavault. He's not trying to put another Lord onto the battlefield. He's holding on to this Echoing Truth, which is, I think, a bit optimistic. Echoing Truth does not necessarily help you survive against Sneak and Show. And certainly not against, maybe against Omniscience, but then you also have to get a bit lucky as to what your opponent is holding.
Now, the one live card in Kedrovic's hand right now, he does have a Force of Will, and clearly he's got blue cards to work with it. What sort of cards will Kedrovic be looking to counter here? As it turns out, none.
That's a quick concession. I mean, also you know that you're not really looking to counter threats. I think you're holding this Force of Will to counter another Force of Will, just to get your threat through. But apparently Andre was already maybe a bit frustrated with what was going on.
Well, on the draw, John McNulty has Gemstone Caverns, the Unlucky Man's Paradise, which, if you are on the draw, you can exile a card in your hand and put it into play with a luck counter on it, which means that it will tap for mana of any color. And after sideboarding, I would anticipate a bit more disruption from John McNulty. While he's not seen very many cards from his opponent, I think it reasonable to believe that he's figured out some of what's going on the other side of the table.
Okay, it looks like there's some discussion going on.
It may be that he's forgotten to exile the card and they're trying to figure out what happens.
Yeah, but I mean, no game actions have been taken since then, right? So I think they should just resolve this trigger. Yeah, that's kind of a weird situation. I assume that there's no judge involved.
Yeah, I guess that there's potentially concern about just figuring out if there was any intent, if there's anything else going on, and ultimately it looks like a Cavern of Souls did get exiled there. Just an island on turn 1 from Kadrovic, and here's a Chalice of the Void on 1. That is being responded to with a Brainstorm. Back to basics in hand for John McNulty.
Yeah, now he's bringing in all the hate he can find. Sorcerer's Spyglass as well to prevent. Yeah, maybe a sneak attack that's not even in Andre's deck.
Now, I've always rather liked the interaction between Cavern of Souls and Chalice of the Void. It lets the Merfolk deck still cast its 1-drops if it's in play, because with Cavern of Souls they can't be countered. But here's a big show and tell on turn 2 from Andrej Kadrovic here.
Yep, he's getting ready to put an Emrakul into play.
Emrakul's pretty big, pretty special. There's no counter magic coming from John McNulty here. Emrakul versus Sorcerer's Spyglass.
Who wins in a fight?
I think he's going to the big spaghetti monster in the sky this time.
It's true for most fights in Magic, but Sorcerer's Spyglass also not the greatest opponent.
Not built for fighting, built for looking. So yes, John McNulty gets to have a look at the rest of the hand, but to be perfectly honest, it's the permanent that's on the battlefield that he should be most worried about here. Emrakul, the Eon's Torn, not being cast, so there's not the extra turn gained by Andrej Kadrovic here, but not too terribly many ways that the Merfolk deck has of dealing with an Emrakul once in play.
No, John will be left with 0 permanence next turn, and there's nothing he can do about it. Okay.
Back to basics.
Just the exact 6 permanents.
Now it's going to look like John McNulty is conceding the game here, and to be fair, he probably should. But in fact, that was annihilated, just meaning that he was getting rid of all of his permanents. Apparently, they did shake hands right after that. I mean, clearly, John McNulty was not coming back from that Emrakul. We do get into game 3 here. John McNulty now on the play. Ether Vial kicking things off, and then a Curse Catcher. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, looks like there is already a copy of Show and Tell in hand for Andrej Kadrovic. He gets to have a look at exactly what's going on the other side of things, work out if the coast is clear. There is a Flusterstorm in hand for John McNulty. In addition to the Curse Catcher he has in play that can potentially disrupt things just a little bit.
That's probably the best hand that John has had so far. It looks like it might have the right amount of disruption to stop Andre from going off. But this Omniscience deck actually can outplay a lot of the taxing effects, the Curse Catchers and the Flusterstorms, by just generating more mana when you play Ancient Tomb, City of Traders, Lotus Petal.
And in that regard, Back to Basics, which is being cast here by John McNulty, not the perfect answer, because yes, it means that non-basic lands don't untap. However, if Andre is just waiting to cast his big spells, he may not need to untap them because a one-shot effect is already good enough.
Exactly, but 2 Curse Catchers is a lot. So now, for example, if he plays his City of Traders, he only has 1 extra mana, so both Curse Catchers would be able to counter the Show and Tell. At the same time, Andre would get a lot of time, because then he's looking at 2 damage per turn instead of 6.
So Gitaxian probes all round.
He even has more Show and Tell, so I think that's a very reasonable line. John's Flusterstorm is currently not active. That's the big reason to go for it here. I really like this. Even the Mutavault of John is turned off, so I would say Andre's probably favored, even though he's kind of destroying his City of Traitors by using it once.
And City of Traitors is the land that you kind of go into things knowing that you might only be using once anyway because of its ability that when another land comes into play, you do have to sacrifice it.
Yeah, Mutavault should not
Mutavault
have
should not be
untapped there.
untapped.
I hope that the players figure that out. Yeah, they do. This is a recorded match, of course, so we cannot interfere. I think they're just making sure that a judge is informed and will fix this.
Yeah, especially when it's one of your own effects that you're forgetting about. It gets a little bit more important to make sure that that gets kept track of so that if it's happening a lot, then they can issue appropriate warnings and so on.
So now John cannot tap out of blue mana anymore. The Flusterstorm is his backup against further show and tells, and his hand is once again pretty nice. He can now put Silvergill Adept into play, maybe draw a Curse Cacher that he could still cast, or just more threats for the late game.
Yeah, this is the easy bit. Let's put more Merfolk into play, drawing cards in the process. A lot of Atlantis, a nice draw, but tapping out here seems like not the play.
No, I think this should just be a rule now. You don't ever tap out a Flusterstorm mana in this kind of board state.
Conveniently here, draws another island, so there is the potential to cast more spells. Doesn't actually need to because of the Ether Vial, meaning that you can just put that Lord of Atlantis into play. So it's going to be 3 coming in from the Master of Pearl Trident, a full 4 coming in from Silvergill Adept, and that enough for the handshake. John McNulty able to get there with Merfolk. Merfolk, they've been around in Legacy a long time. They're all about the quick clock alongside disruption, and that plus a little bit of luck in game 1 with the way that the draws worked out for the Omni show list. Enough for the Merfolk to take it.
I think game 1 is difficult for Merfolk, but after sideboarding you do have even more counter magic. You get those Flusterstorms, those back to basics that really make a difference.
Lovely stuff. Yeah, I think that Merfolk, one of those lists that's kind of fallen out of favor to some extent, but when you have disruption and a quick clock, there's always going to be a little bit of potential there. And Island Walk, so big in this format, almost all of the decks in the format seem to be running islands, and you really can punish them. And then back to basics. Yes, we think about some of the wastelands and so on as being a big way of punishing non-basic lands. Imagine back to basics against some of these Delver lists.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think Merfolk is definitely viable. You would have to convince me why you're playing it instead of something like Grixis Delver, but I respect the deck. I respect the decision to bring it to a Legacy Grand Prix.
And 8-1, a very nice position to be in. When you've got the 1 loss going in overnight, you really are on a knife edge because, yes, that's a fantastic finish for day 1, but still so much work to do to make top 8 of any Grand Prix. And starting off your day with a loss, you can really feel that one. You've got a lot of work suddenly to do to right that ship. And picking up the early win against potentially a slightly tricky matchup there, that has to be a good feeling as you start off your day 2.
Yeah. I always find it fascinating. If you're 7-1 after day 1, then you lose the round, you go to 7-2, you feel pretty bad. Like you feel deflated. You feel like your day is starting off badly. If you go 6-2, you just make it in and you win the first round. You feel really good about yourself, even though the situation from then on is actually identical.
So what we're saying is that momentum is a thing, even if it's only within the heads of the players playing, in order to sort of keep their ship sailing the right direction, keep them feeling good and positive about how their day's going.
Yeah, I think a lot of players are too much focused on what is my record now, what do I have to do in the next couple of rounds. In the end, the answer is always the same. You have to win as many rounds as possible.
Yeah.
And if you win enough, you'll make top 8. If you win enough, you'll make top 16. But in the end, it's not really relevant at the moment you're playing.
Yeah, it's funny. Every now and again we have people come along asking how best to get a feature match, how to get into the feature match area, get on camera. And the slightly glib answer is just keep on winning. If you win every single round, you will definitely be in the finals, at which point you will definitely get a feature match. And you know what? If you win enough, you might even get in there a little bit sooner. That is the end of our round here. We will have Raf and Riley with more Good Morning Magic for you soon enough. But first, don't go anywhere. We got these messages.